Hi, my name is Matt Tatz, a PhD student in the Odom School of Ecology at the University of Georgia. I'm going to take you back in time to demonstrate how birds can teach us about the health of ecosystems by presenting a study I published on mercury exposure in the American white ibis. Let's go. We start in the 1800s in the thriving Florida Everglades, the warm, wet river of grass that hundreds of bird species have always called home. Famous naturalist John James Audubon once wrote that wading birds appeared in such numbers to actually block out light from the sun for some time. Birds like the American white ibis thrive here thanks to an abundance of crawfish in the shallow waters. However, two catastrophes would soon diminish this ecosystem. In 1949, canals were built to provide water for urban and agricultural development. This decreased water flow in the Everglades by 70%, devastating crawfish populations. By 1990, 90% of nesting ibis abandoned the river of grass due to a shortage of food. Even worse, in the 1980s, Florida began burning their trash, which caused mercury to enter the atmosphere and then rain into the waters of the Everglades. When the chemical sulfate enters these waters, the mercury is then able to be taken up by animals like fish. From there, mercury levels become higher in animals that eat the fish, like bigger fish, birds, and people, which can harm human and wildlife health. During this period, people could not eat fish in 74% of Florida's freshwater rivers and lakes because the mercury levels in the fish were dangerously high. To monitor mercury pollution, scientists chose the white ibis as a model species because they ate contaminated crawfish throughout the Everglades. They found that these ibis were exposed to 7 times more mercury than before Florida burned most of their waste. As the Everglades habitat became worse and more polluted, ibis began foraging in urban parks, zoos, landfills, and residential areas in the 1990s. However, these ibis may encounter mercury in the urban water bodies that they're using due to gasoline emissions. There haven't been any follow-up studies on how much mercury that ibis are exposed to in the time since Florida reduced the amount of trash that they burn. Therefore, it isn't clear if these reductions have successfully decreased the ibis's exposure to mercury. For people, mercury levels in hair that are higher than 5 parts per million are considered harmful. Imagine that as 5 drops of mercury in 10 gallons of water. To check mercury levels in the ibis, scientists look at their feathers instead of hair. Before Florida started burning its trash, the ibis had just 1 drop of mercury in their feathers. But when Florida was burning a lot of its trash, the ibis had 7 drops of mercury, which is more than what is safe for humans. To see if mercury levels in the ibis have decreased 15 years later, our team measured mercury in the ibis that were caught at places with little urban development to those with a lot. We discovered that even though all ibis still had some mercury, they now only had 2 drops in their feathers, which is a lot less when Florida was burning most of its trash. We think this is thanks to Everglades habitat restoration efforts and to the regulations banning trash burning in Florida. Since the ibis have less mercury now, it means that the food they eat must also have less mercury in it. By studying the ibis, we now know that people who are fishing in the Everglades must also be eating less mercury. Interestingly, we also found that ibis caught in sites with less urban development had higher levels of mercury. But why? We think this is because those areas are closer to the Everglades agricultural area, where fertilizers that contain sulfate pollute the waterways and increase mercury exposure to the animals there. Also, the ibis that live in more urban areas often eat human food handouts and trash, which are unlikely to contain mercury. So, what are the advantages of tracking mercury levels in the white ibis over time? We have evidence that limiting the amount of trash burning in Florida has been successful because the ibis are exposed to less mercury now than they were a few decades ago. This work demonstrates the insights that comparing recent data with historical data can produce. This type of study can enable scientists to assess current management efforts and handle potential contamination events in the future, thereby improving human and wildlife health worldwide. This article was published in the Journal of Wildlife Diseases. Thank you for watching this video.